Chris, can we hear you?
Sounds good to me.
Nice, nice. Well, welcome. We're going to get going here in a minute as folks join. It is right at the strike of noon here, Mountain Time, 11 o'clock East Pacific. And Chris, you're on the East Coast. You've been all over the place. How was Dubai?
Dubai was very cool. It took me a solid week to get over the jet lag when I got home, which is probably the longest I've ever been jet lagged. And now I'm on the East Coast, and so the jet lag's not going to be as bad when I get home, but here I am again.
Nice. Well, thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I've been a fan of yours, a follower of yours for a very long time. I know you and I have had our fair share of conversations, but I'm excited, very excited to for you to share your wisdom with all these fine folks.
You know, we'll see how much wisdom we can get out of this head today. So
it's an evergreen topic. And you know what's so funny, Chris, is like people are always searching for all these shortcuts or cheat codes or something like that. And time again, in the content I see from you, from other folks, it's the fundamentals. It's mastering the basics. And so much value comes from mastering those basics. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. How to prepare, how to show up, how to follow up. Like these things, it's not rocket science, but they are the make or break things.
Totally. Yeah. You know, we kind of live in an instant gratification microwave world.
Yeah.
Where the silver bullet really resonates with people, because we live in a world where there are 10-second TikToks and Instagram reels and that kind of thing. But what actually works in real life and what is promised on the internet are often two different things. So
often, aka always, different things. All right, we're 2 minutes in. For the people who are here on time, good for you. For everybody else who's straggling, I'm sure people will continue to join, but we're going to get going without them. So yes, this is being recorded. Yes, you will get the recording after this sometime today or tomorrow, later this week at the latest. Without further ado, though, let's just jump in. I'm going to share some very lightweight slides. Don't worry, everybody. We're not going to kill you with slides.
I'm the guy who kills people with slides. My webinar decks are like 200 slides minimum. If anybody in this room has been on a webinar deck that I run, they know what I'm talking
about. Well, we're going to do our best to not do a little death by PowerPoint today. But Chris, can you see the slide?
I can see it great.
Sweet. Okay, so this is the topic today. Driving sales performance, and maybe in parentheses, with AI. A lot of what we're going to talk about today, as Chris and I just said, this is a lot of mindset stuff. This is a lot of kind of sales foundational type things that you can think about. And what we want to show you is, and help get Chris's thoughts on, is how to think in 2024. What are the strategies you're going to need to execute? And then how can we leverage AI to make this a little bit easier for everybody? So the plan for today is you hear from me and Chris, and we're going to talk about Chris's background here in a moment. We're going to talk about the power of preparation. We're going to talk about personalized and timely deal management. And hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So as you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We have a lovely team of moderators here who are trying to make sure that we touch as many questions as we can. And we'll try and reserve some time at the end specifically for Q&A. So, Chris Orlob, who are you? Where have you been? What do you do now?
Man, these logos take me back. Yeah. So my name's Chris. I run a cool company that helps tech and SaaS salespeople acquire economically valuable skills. That's what we do over at P Club. Probably what I'm best known for is spending a bunch of time at a company called Gong, where Kyle and I, at least for a short overlapping time while he was at Clari, I think we were a little bit frenemies there. I don't think you and I had talked during that time. That helped grow the company from a little under $200,000 in revenue when I joined. The logo looked way less cool than the logo you're seeing here. Oh, it was bad. And we ended up, or by the time I left, we were a little over 200 million. That's what I'm best known for. Some of these other logos are, some of my early career stuff. Conversature, which is like a little speech bubble thing. That company was supposed to be Gong. That is a company that me and my co-founder, same co-founder from P Club, we tried to start the equivalent of Gong before we really knew about it. That's how I ended up joining Gong. And then before that, I was a tyke account executive at InsideSales.com for a number of years.
Beautiful. And we'll talk a little bit more at the end about P Club and Quota Signal and what you're doing and all the training. But I have to plant the seed now for people. Go to pclub.io, just put it in a browser tab right now and revisit it later. There's so much gold there for like an unbelievable amount of value. So, Chris, you're doing a major service to the entire industry. And thank you. Thank you for everything. And follow Chris on LinkedIn as well. Like if you're not already doing that, what are you doing? What are you doing? All right, enough. I'll stop chastising everybody, and we'll jump in to the meat of the topic. So I've always loved this quote. I found it attributed to Chris Voss, everybody's favorite former FBI negotiator, and now sales and business negotiator. And he says, "When the pressure is on, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to the highest level of your preparation." I've always loved this quote because it really is all about preparation. The amount of work that you put in determines how much confidence you have, how much knowledge you have, and ultimately how well you do in all things in life, and especially in sales. And I know, Chris, you've got some particular thoughts on preparation and the power of prep work. So talk to us. Like, what does good preparation look like? What's the value of meaningful preparation for sales calls?
Well, there's almost like two conflicting but both valuable mindsets when it comes to some of these things. Number one is like is the Facebook adage in their early days where it's like move fast and break things. In other words, don't really prepare, just get something into market to start getting feedback. And then you have Apple on the other end of the spectrum, which their mantra is measure twice, cut once, right? In other words, prepare and overinvest in preparation so that during the moment of performance, you're going to win and you're going to perform well. And I don't think those are mutually exclusive philosophies. I think you have to apply the right philosophy to the right situation. And I think there are many types of sales calls that lend itself to move fast and break things and speed of action. And there are many types of sales calls where you shouldn't just measure twice, you should measure 3 or 4 times before you cut, right? Chris Voss, negotiation, those are a perfect example of the type of selling situation where you want to dramatically overinvest in preparation. Whereas, if you're selling something transactional like to a restaurant or something, and you're just making a bunch of cold calls, you probably don't need to be incredibly deliberate with preparing for each and every one of those interactions you're about to have. And so I think that's one of the first things I would encourage salespeople to do is see if you can mentally categorize what kind of repeated situations you run into that do demand and clamor for a very high level of preparation. Because when you do it right and you're preparing for the right thing, to me, that is a task that's worth roughly $1,000 per hour in personal income, right? So I didn't invent this. This is kind of like becoming popular on the internet, but you can think of the various tasks that you follow or that you do as being worth $0 an hour, $10 an hour, $100 an hour, which is most of them, $1,000 an hour, and even $10,000 per hour. And as a side note, yes, even salespeople occasionally do things that are worth $10,000 an hour. We just kind of do them by accident. And we spend way too much time typically on administrative things, on things that are not high revenue producing things. So I think I went on like 6 different tangents there. So throw me a life raft here, get me to stop talking and just redirect me wherever you want me to go.
Well, that's such good advice. And I love that thought process of really segmenting your daily activities into the highest and lowest value things and trying to optimize the time you spend on those high value things. Like, Chris, before we started the webinar, you were saying you're blocking off every day, but as much as you can before 10 a.m. to focus on the highest value things when your mind is the freshest, the sharpest, and you can eliminate all the noise that's coming at you the rest of the day and just get the real hard work done. And so you're very intentional about that. Certainly I am too. Let's go to a specific type of sales activity that's a huge time suck and a necessary one for sellers, which is building account plans. We asked this poll question: how much time do you spend each week building account plans? And it seems like most people are in the 1 to 2 hours, 2 to 5 hours type range. Talk to us about like best practices for building account plans. What are you seeing as a means for preparation? What are you seeing as hallmarks of a solid account plan?
Yeah. Well, account plan's an interesting one because when you take that thing we just talked about, like $10 an hour, $100 an hour, et cetera, account planning actually fits into both of those, where the end
Mhm.
outcome of an account plan is probably worth like 500 or $1,000 an hour in terms of you using that account plan to navigate accounts and to penetrate accounts. Often, not always, but often, the grunt work that goes into building an account plan can be very low leverage,
Yeah.
right? It can take a lot of time for a person to go research a company and figure out how they make money. And what did the CEO say in their latest earnings report? Or reading through the 10K to understand the next year's strategic priorities. So I think this is one of those things where you can almost look at AI and the various tools that we have that are AI driven as like your smart intern friend who's doing a lot of the job for you. Now, one thing you do if you've ever managed interns, which I haven't, so I'm kind of making this up as I go. But what I would imagine you do if you manage smart interns is even though they're smart and they might come from like a good business school, you probably still want to spot check their work before
Right.
you use that work. And so that is one of the warnings that I would give salespeople is I think most of us get that, right? Like if AI is serving you a work output that you are then going to use in a high stakes situation, such as trying to close a deal, you probably want to spot check that rather than walking into that situation blindly because there are, times where, AI is not perfect when it
Right.
comes to the information it might summarize for you, but it can sure eliminate 80 or 90% of the work that keeps you away from, higher output activities that you could be spending your time on.
Totally agree. And I'll add on to that, Chris. Like we're about to show a workflow for building an account plan with AI. The purpose of this is not just to check the box and say, all right, my account plan is built. The point of this is to leverage AI to exactly your point, eliminate the mundane, the menial, research steps so that you can focus on studying the outputs, like study the actual account plan that gets created. If all you're doing is just saying like, yes, I have an account plan for this company, that's not the goal here. The goal is to learn. And so your learning should take you down yet another path where the AI account plan surfaces something and you're like, that's interesting. I need to double click on that and do the next level of research. So
Mm.
is this account plan going to be 100% of what you need? No, no, it can't be 60, 70, 80%, probably. And you can tune it to get better and better over time. But the goal is so that it unlocks the way that you think. And if you try and approach sales without thinking, you're not going to be successful. One of the other things I know, Chris, you talk a lot about is using the company's or the prospect's language when you're in sales presentations or in sales settings. What do you mean by that? And how can a rep do that?
I'm sure a lot of sales trainers will disagree with me on this one, but I'll die on this hill. Many of us are taught in sales, like we all get the importance of summarizing what your buyer says, and that kind of thing. But we're too often paraphrasing.
Hmm.
And paraphrasing is actually kind of a negative thing when it comes to sales because it's far more powerful to almost word for word relay back the words that your buyer used. Because you can almost like think of a word as like a container, right? And like what goes inside the container is different from human being to human being.
Hmm.
And if you're using different containers to paraphrase, you might be missing the mark completely versus using the exact words that they've used. And we're just talking about one thing right now, which is summarizing. Now, a more powerful implementation of using your buyer's words is to use the words they use to articulate their pain and desired outcomes in like a prospecting message or early sales interactions like a discovery call where you're sharing a point of view.
Yeah.
The problem is prospecting is a little bit of a catch 22 where you haven't talked to the person yet. So how do you know what words to use?
Right.
And it just so happens that we live in a very digital age and many people, especially high profile executives, have digital footprints. And you can aggregate those digital footprints with these tools with AI to understand their language patterns. And I realize that sounds really nerdy, and it is because I'm probably the world's biggest nerd who happened. Like, I feel like everybody in sales is like, a former athlete or something like that. And I guess I was in a different life, but I just don't think of myself that way anymore. But I mean, imagine that. Imagine taking all of the world or all of that person's most powerful, cherished, dearest words and having it in front of you, aggregated, and being able to write a prospecting message from that point of view. Much more powerful, right? Like a lot of people talk about how sales, like technology is not really going to help salespeople. And there is some wisdom in that, meaning like the skills you have are what's most important. But also, if you're a salesperson who's not using these tools, it's kind of like racing the Grand Prix in a horse and buggy, right? Like if all of your competitors are just blazing past because they have a better tool than you know. So I wish I had a more elegant way to punctuate what I just said, but that's the end of the thought, unfortunately.
It's a great exclamation point. And you know what's funny, Chris, is when people think about personalization, they think about, oh, I need to know where this person grew up or where their kids go to school or something creepy about them. And that's not really what we mean by personalization. What you just described is personalization. The way they speak, the way they think. If you can frame your value prop through that lens, that's a much more powerful way to personalize whatever, message or call or whatever you're making to that person. So understanding who they are, how they speak, how they think is really valuable. And also understanding the industry that they're in, the terminology that they use, the metrics that matter to them. Like, I'll give you a very simple example. We, in many cases, tech salespeople are selling to other tech companies. And we think of this,
Isn't that a flea market? Like you buy me if I buy you?
yeah, a house of cards, maybe. Yeah, who knows? But a lot of times we're very insular and we think that everybody uses the word revenue to mean what we mean in tech: annual recurring revenue, net revenue retention, all those types of
Hmm.
things. But as soon as you go outside of tech, revenue is an accounting principle. They don't have a chief revenue officer. They think about things as sales, chief sales officer, or bookings, or things like that. And so, even just that little simple shift, if your entire value prop is based around generating more revenue, and you're saying that to somebody who is like, that's not, we're trying to generate more sales, you've already missed. And I know that sounds really small, but it makes a
Oh,
huge difference.
it's such a what's that saying? Little hinges that swing open big doors. That's exactly what that is. I was actually having a conversation with a mutual friend of ours, Devin Reed, just the other
Yeah.
day doing his podcast, and we talked about how this is going to get like a little bit abstract and weird. So just like bear with me for a second. um, we talk about how humans have intellectual shortcuts for communicating with each other in a way that actually disintegrates communication. So that was really abstract. So I'm going to give you an example so that we all know what the hell I'm talking about. If I say the word, um, let's go eat some apples, you know exactly what I mean, right? There's no confusion there because we are talking about something that's very tangible and concrete and visualizable, if that's a word, which is an apple. If I go one level of abstraction up, though, which is a shortcut, and I say, hey, let's go have some fruit together. Now the odds of us being on not the same page have dramatically gone up because, like I said, words are like little containers. So when I say fruit, I might be thinking of a bowl of like cantaloupe and watermelon and stuff. And you might be thinking of blueberries and strawberries and that kind of thing. So we've already like probably more than doubled the likelihood of us miscommunicating.
Right.
If I go up even one more level and I say, hey, let's go eat some food. Well, I just had a Mediterranean wrap for lunch. You might have had ramen or something like that. And so now we're just like way not even close to being on the same page. And so the summary of like why I'm sharing this is we humans have these intellectual shortcuts, like saying, hey, do you want to go get lunch or whatever? Or hey, grow revenue, even though that word is like a little bit too far up here. And you can double the effectiveness of your communication by adding more concreteness and tangibility to it and bringing your language a level down several notches in terms of its abstract ability. And I realize the irony of this entire like talk track. It's like the most abstract talk track we ever done. And I'm telling you not to be abstract, but hopefully at least some of us understand what I'm talking about.
It's great. It's great. So let's a little loose lips in the chat there. Let's get into the actual workflow of building an account plan. We're going to bring all this together. So we're now in CopyAI's platform, and we have these out of the box, what we call workflows, which is basically sets of prompts that we're feeding to LLMs to spit out an output that we want. And so what we're looking at here in this example is the company research workflow. And all we have to do is input the name of an account, and we're going to get all of this information that we tell the AI to go get for us. Research the company, look at some recent news, summarize that news, and then importantly, as we were just talking about, the industry terms, so that when I do my outreach, I at least have a frame to understand what are the key words that are going to matter to this industry and that I need to go learn about. So I already ran this because for the sake of time, it takes like maybe 30 or 60 seconds, which isn't a long time in real life, but in webinar time, if we just sat here for 30 seconds, people will be like, this thing sucks. So anyway, here's the output of what we came up with. Research the company, and it goes through and it looks, I asked it to look for Okta. So it went and found all these different sources across the web, look at Quora, support, more on Quora, some other like blog posts, cloudfoundation.com. And then it summarizes the company details. So you can see here, here's all the firmographic information that you need to know about Okta. And then we can keep going down and ask it, okay, cool, but let's actually look at some news. What's going on inside of Okta? So you can see looking at press releases, we're looking at some recent GeekWire posts, looking at all these things and then summarize that news into good and bad. Good news, fourth quarter earnings are here. It's on track with targets. Cool. Challenging news, you may have heard last week, or maybe this was yesterday. No, last week, that they're doing layoffs. So super recent, up to date information here. Not great news, obviously, but very good for you to know before you do any outreach. And then industry terms. What does Okta do? Their cybersecurity, their identity management. So you can see here all of these terms that you need to know, maybe not in your initial outreach, but certainly as you run the deal, you're going to need to know what all these things are. So the goal of this, again, is not to be okay, I checked the box, now I have my account plan. It's meant to be a starting point for you to go and think strategically about how do I craft a follow-up strategy, excuse me, based on this. Your thoughts, Chris?
Well, if you're using this, you're competing with two other types of sellers. One is like, all right, I don't have time to do this, so I'm just gonna, kind of mass blast all of my email outreach, right? That's one. The other person you're competing with is the person who is getting to your level of personalization,
Right.
but they're doing all of this manually and therefore able to get to a third of the number of accounts. So this is an example of like, it's almost like having the Iron Man suit and then going into a fight, right? Not to use like a violent analogy. Maybe we redact that. Hopefully that wasn't too violent for anybody. We've all seen Iron Man, but that's the point I'm making is like things like this, you still need to have the skill, right? You still need to know how to write the outreach or make the call or whatever it is. But now you are moving with speed. You are moving
Exactly.
faster.
Exactly. That's 100% right. And so the cool thing about Copy AI is you can embed this little form, like say you're a SDR manager, sales manager, something like that. You don't necessarily need your team in the back end here. You can create a little form and then have it exist like this in your team's wiki, or pin this in Slack or whatever. So when they come in and they need to do research on on Chris's company, they can just type it in here and get the account plan starter that they need. So we have a really cool set of workflows for this, and just wanted to show that off. I'm going to pause here. I'm looking for any questions in the chat about this account planning. Does anybody have any specific questions about account plans before we move on to the next topic? I don't see anything. We'll give everybody a minute. Any closing thoughts, Chris, about account planning?
No, I mean, this is just a good example of the, measure twice and cut once adage that we talked about earlier. And the fact that modern technology allows you to do the measuring twice far, far faster than you were able to do so before.
Yeah, 100%. So where are reps supposed to store this information? Totally up to you, Caleb. I've seen people do all of this in your CRM, just on the account page in your CRM. So you have different fields for good news, bad news, firmographics, whatever. I've seen people use purpose-built software, like Quip is a pretty popular one. I've seen people just use Google Docs. My advice is have it somewhere that's shareable. so that if you're an AE, you and your SDR can collaborate, or you and your sales manager can collaborate. Just don't do it on your own local desktop in your own notes app or something like that. It needs to be shareable so that other people can get value from this and contribute to it.
Mm.
Okay. Carl asks, is there a limit to how many searches a rep can make in a month? Yes and no. We have the way that CopyAI works is by credits. So you purchase a certain amount of credits and you can go run those things. These account plans are super cheap to run, super cheap to run. So probably wouldn't hit any theoretical maximum on that. And we're going to keep it moving. All right. Next topic for us, Chris, is this topic of deal follow-up and time management. And I have to share this quote that everybody has heard countless times. If you haven't heard it, if you're new to sales, I promise you, you will hear it. Time kills all deals. So talk to us, Chris, about the importance of timeliness, the importance of follow-up, and where and why do you see reps not abiding by this adage?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts to share. So there's this woman named Julie Girdner. I don't know if you've heard of her.
Yeah.
Okay, you have. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for those of you who haven't heard of her, she writes a newsletter called Ultra Successful. And Julie is a performance coach and psychologist whose shtick is to coach executives and entrepreneurs who have an average net worth of $50 million anonymously. And so she works with these really just high performing, at least from a financial standpoint, individuals. And she writes what she learns about them anonymously in this newsletter. And one of her most popular posts is called Success Requires Closing the Gap. And the entire idea behind that post is most people go from thought to action very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
They learn something new and they think about it and then they forget about it. Then they remember and they start puttering around and they have all these internal conversations with themselves. And then maybe finally they feebly do something. And it only kind of works. And so they give up on it. Whereas super successful people, the ultra successful, they have a habit of shrinking the delta between a new idea or a thought and an action. They learn something and then bam, they put it into action immediately. Now, salespeople, at least a pocket of salespeople, have this erroneous idea in their head that slowness to respond can sometimes communicate, hey, I'm not desperate for your business, and that's a good thing. And what I would say to that is right in theory, but wrong in execution, right? You do want to not be needy and you want to have equal business stature and all that kind of stuff, but speed of response, not the place to execute on that idea.
Right.
And one of the things that I've observed, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's like some sort of study out there that confirms this, is buyers will typically mirror your responsiveness, right? If you're slow to respond, like if you take 2 days to answer an email from them, you will often, not always, because nothing is always with human beings, but you will often see that they then take 2 days to respond. And if you respond very fast, if they email you and within a couple hours, once you're online, you respond to it, you'll often see that they replicate that level of responsiveness. So that's kind of like the first kind of piece I had to that. We've also, going way back to my InsideSales.com days, there was tremendous amount of research around speed to respond for inbound leads. Right. So this data is a little bit outdated, but it probably still holds true where, if I'm remembering right, you're like 21 times, not 21%, but 21 times more likely to book a meeting from an inbound lead if you call them within 5 minutes of them hitting your website. Like they go to your demo request and bam, you call them. And I get that like 1 in 100 of them will be like, this is creepy, I don't like it. But that's probably worth the 99 demos you booked. Okay, it's okay if some person thinks you're a cheese ball just because you followed up really fast.
That's so I had never thought about that kind of reciprocal behavioral pattern in the follow-up, but it makes a lot of sense. When a rep is hyper responsive to me as a buyer, I feel like I owe it to them to be responsive to them. I had never thought about that before, but it makes a lot of sense. And what's interesting is I think you're right, Chris. Like some salespeople, they treat it like, they're going on a first date and they're like, I don't want to I don't want to be too
Yeah.
needy. And so I'll wait till tomorrow. And then tomorrow becomes Wednesday. And then, by the end of the week, I'll send my follow-up. It's like, guys, in that 4 days you waited, guess what the buyer is doing? They're evaluating your competitors. Like, you've got to control what you can control. And that kind of messaging, the cadence of the messaging is absolutely one of the things you can control. And to your point, I'll echo it, Chris, not the area to pump the brakes on. Like, speed is pretty critical.
Yeah. One of the best reps I hired at Gong, she had this habit of, she wouldn't do this on every call because sometimes it was inappropriate to do it. But as she was wrapping up a call with a buyer and suggesting next steps, she would say, "Is meeting again tomorrow too soon?"
Love that.
And most reps, for whatever reason, I don't know why this is, but like the default time frame that comes out of their mouth when they're suggesting that next steps is always a week or two, right? They're always like, "Hey, can you meet, next week or the following week to do a demo?"
Yeah.
It's like, sometimes it makes sense for time to go by, right? Your buyer might have some internal homework they need to do before some kind of next meeting. But if you just did a discovery call and now you're scheduling a demo, try to do that sucker tomorrow or maybe the next day. There's no reason a bunch of time needs to pass between those two steps. And if you take advantage of that, you can significantly reduce your sales cycle and do nothing else, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's that one habit can shrink your sales cycle.
Absolutely. It reminds me of the Frank Slootman book, Amp It Up, where
Yeah.
he's talking a lot about internal processes, and somebody will come to him and say, "Oh, we think we can get this done by next week." He's like, "Well, what about tomorrow?" And they're like, "All right, okay." You figure out a way to compress timelines, and if you can do that from a sales process standpoint, that's the name of the game. Like, there are a handful of factors across the deal that make the biggest impact. What's your close rate from qualified opportunity to close? So what's your win rate? What's your ASP, and what's your deal cycle time? Those are the three main things. And if you can find a way to optimize any of those three, you're going to be in much better shape than anybody else. Of course, if you can optimize all three, you're going to be world class for the rest of your life. Talk to us about multi-threading, Chris. So you have a meeting with, person A from an account. What is your goal during that meeting to identify, or how do you identify persons B, C, D that should be involved in the deal?
Well, let me go back and put one more
Please.
nail in the coffin on the speed thing, and then I'll come back to multi-threading. Speed, like, I'm so passionate about that we baked speed as a company value into P Club. So we have a bunch of like operating principles like many companies do, and one of ours is fall like lightning, which basically means act really fast. And it's kind of a funny backstory because I originally before we hired people, and it was just me and my co-founder, I wanted to call this principle money loves speed. Now, my co-founder talked me out of it because he's the CTO and he's wiser than me and realized that not everybody in our company is going to work in sales, and that doesn't really resonate with everybody. So we changed the name of it to kind of our own take on a Sun Tzu quote, right? He talks about like fall like a thunderbolt. But there is a lot of wisdom and truth in those three words: money loves speed.
Yeah.
It's worth just writing those down and thinking about it and seeing if you can institutionalize it or just habitualize it within your own life. So I'll come back to the multi-threading thing now. Couple preambles to this. First, I think Kristen Connor is probably one of the world's experts on multi-threading. And for everybody listening, if you don't follow her on LinkedIn, I would suggest doing that. So Kristen, Kry Sten, and then Connor with an ER at the end. I'm not going to spell her entire name. Really, really smart when it comes to multi-threading strategies. Yeah. One of the points she makes, and I'm kind of stealing from her right now, is she makes a distinction between random acts of multi-threading and strategic multi-threading. And that contrast takes me back to a lot of mistakes and lessons that I made myself and saw others make in my early Gong days and InsideSales.com days, where I would multi-thread for its own sake, right? So especially in the early days at Gong, it was almost like, oh, let's see if we can get IT in because it's another person coming into the deal and there's more influence, or sales ops. And it turned out that those two personas, nothing against people who work in those, places, but at least for the Gong sale early on, those were where deals went to die, at sales ops or IT in, and there was a very specific way of navigating around those personas. There's no less adversarial way to say that, because to some extent it was an adversarial relationship between them. And so like the first thing you need to think about when it comes to multi-threading is not all multi-threading is good multi-threading. You need to think about the right blend of people that your type of sale requires to get a deal done, to get it done fast, and to get it done big if you're trying to close big deals.
It's really well said, Chris. And so I want to show another pretty cool workflow we have that can help with multi-threading. So this is something, of course, that you can do with Zoom Info or Apollo or Sales Navigator or whatever it may be. But oftentimes those search terms are a little inflexible, and you may not find the exact people that you're trying to find. And so the upshot of using AI for this is you can be more expansive with how you're defining the multi-threading, the ICP, the ideal customer titles that you're trying to search for, and let the AI do the work for you. So what I've done here is I've said, okay, we're selling into 6 cents. I had that first call with the revenue operations person. I know that I need to get to the most senior level sales or revenue people. I didn't say CRO, VP of sales, director of sales, whatever it is, the most senior sales and revenue people. And just give me the top 8 people you find, Mr. or Mrs. AI robot. And what the AI robot is doing is it's writing basically a SQL query. And we don't need to go into too much detail here, but it's writing a pretty cool query that's saying, return all of these titles. So all I said was senior level, most senior level. And here's the query that it returns. So CRO, SVP, EVP, all the way down the line, and not these titles. Okay, very cool. It extracts that query and then it runs it against this database to find these people. So who's Con McCann? Con McCon, let's look at him. VP of Commercial Sales. Pretty cool. Now I could chain another workflow on this that says read through his LinkedIn profile, understand what his responsibilities are, what he does there, and then craft a personal email to him using this information that we got from this first meeting. So there's a million different ways that you can use this live prospects workflow.
That is powerful.
To find prospects. Isn't that awesome?
So
same sort of thing. If you're a sales leader or operations person, you don't want your team in the back end of our platform futzing around with these workflows. You can just give them this form embedded in their wiki, and they can go and run. And so this kind of thing that's really, really cool. And looking at live information instead of outdated databases. And the best live information we have is LinkedIn, especially if you're selling to sales or marketing people. So I thought that was a pretty cool thing to show.
Yeah, I love when I get to join these things and like something happens that I can immediately put to use in my business. And I'm like waiting for this to be over so I can just call my head of sales and like, hey, Meredith, I think we should probably be using CopyAI now.
Only a matter of time, Chris. We'll get you. We'll get you. Let's go into the actual follow-up email here. So I have a particular framework that's worked really well for me over the years. And everybody will have a different approach to what a good post-email framework looks like. The goal of showing this is not necessarily so that you take this exact template and use it in your business. It's so that you do create a template for yourself, so that at the end of every call or the end of every day, you're looking at the 6 meetings you had and you're like, something bespoke for every single one. Like, that's not the way. The way to do this is have some sort of framework that you abide by. And this has worked really well for me. And I've gotten really good feedback from the prospects I've worked with in the past. So I call it the 3x3, 3 highlights, 3 actions. I've gotten emails from sellers that have like the entire mutual action plan and it's 30 different actions. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. Like, I mean, is there any wonder why buyers go dark on sellers? You're like, you mean that I don't get my Sundays anymore because I have to execute on this? No, thank you.
Exactly. So keep it super simple. And then the purpose of showing the highlights is remind them of the aha moments, remind them of the time during the demo where Chris said, I got to go call my head of sales because this is something we need immediately. Like, okay, remember we had that find prospects action? Pretty cool. So just click through the top 3 things. And if you're a superstar and you want to link to the call recording snippets that you have of these 3 things, that also makes it really easy for your prospect to share this internally with other people that they think would find it interesting. So feel free to do that and make their life as easy as possible. So this is my format. Chris, I'm curious to hear what your format looks like.
I mean, this is my format now. I look at this and I'm like, oh, it's so clean. Like there are 3 single line bullets that like don't, you know, whatever the opposite of truncate is and turn into like multiple lines. So I wish I had something insightful to add to this, but I don't know that you could improve upon what we're looking at right
Oh my, that is high praise. Okay, that's my win for the week. So now let's look at yet another workflow where this is our called follow-up workflow. And it's taking a sales transcript and creating the follow-up for us. So we're saying who was there, summarize the meeting, what were the problems and next steps, and then let's just make sure that all the people that are mentioned end up in the output of the email and then write the email. And what's really cool about Copy AI is this is not like ChatGPT where you would paste in the transcript and cross your fingers and hope that you get some sort of output. This is all reusable. And so you can see here in this little, the background prompt I'm sending to the LLM, I'm saying, here's a format that I want this email to be in. Greeting, 2 to 3 bullet recap, 2 to 3 bullet next steps, and follow this example. And I just copy pasted the exact example that you just saw. So now when I feed a transcript into this workflow, it's going to spit out an email that abides by the 3 by 3 or maybe 2 and 2 if it doesn't find enough information. And that's the power of AI. Like, yeah, you were sitting in the meeting, you could probably write this yourself. But why not have the AI write a first draft and then you can go improve upon it?
now. One of the things this lets you do, aside from the intrinsic value of sending a post call, summary email, is it helps you act on one of the things we talked about before, which is speed. Because sales is kind of made up in a bunch of like mini moments, right? Moments that matter, that feel like they're small, but can have an outsized impact. And imagine getting off a customer call and you sending this within an hour or even sooner, because that's all it takes, while every other rep is saving all of their post-call follow-up email writings for after dinner that night, and they're batching them all together because they know it's going to be a ton of work, versus doing this once and then pressing a couple buttons and it spits it out. And
Yep.
now you're creating that speed relationship between buyer or seller that we talked about, and getting them to reciprocate speed of response with you.
It's exactly right. It's all about speed. It's all about optimization. And so I'm going to inelegantly segue to the kind of the close here before we get into some Q&A. A lot of what we just showed, this is a couple snowflakes on the tip of the iceberg. Like, we're just scratching the surface of what this AI sales OS, that's the suite of workflows that we're showing you for salespeople. We're just scratching the surface of what this OS can do. If you're interested in a deeper dive, Nathan, if you could put up that last poll we had. If you're interested in a deeper dive and you want to see one of our solutions people walk through a bunch more of the capabilities and talk through integrations and how you get started and all those things, we're going to be doing a bit of a group demo, so to speak, this Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific. So just say yes to the poll question. We'll throw you on that invite, and hopefully we'll get you all up to speed. Let's go into the close here, Chris, which is Q&A. Let's see. If you have any questions for Chris about these topics or anything else, please throw them in the chat. I've done a miserable job of trying to manage the chat as we've gone because I've been rapt attention to you, Chris.
Well, it's not an easy job. Multitasking between those things I've been there.
Actually, Chris, let's use this as people are getting their questions in, and I hope they do. Talk to us a bit about P Club and the resources that you have. And I'm just going to go to your website real quick, if that's all right.
Yeah. So P Club is an online learning platform where you can sign up and you get instant access to a huge library of online courses created by the top revenue practitioners on the planet. Kyle here is actually an example of one of those revenue practitioners who teaches a course on navigating your career as an SDR. And so if you're a SaaS or technology salesperson or leader, you know that market conditions have never been harder. Buying decisions are made way up here by more risk-averse people and more people. And you have to reinvent your skills if you're going to stay ahead of the curve and close more SaaS deals and exceed your OTE. And we have just thousands of before and after success stories of sales professionals transforming their income, their careers, and their skill sets by joining P Club, taking the courses, and joining the community that we have at their disposal.
Wonderful. And I've heard nothing but great things from all the people that have done courses on P Club. So if like whatever, look at that smiling face. whatever you are interested in, there is a topic for you. Can't recommend these resources highly enough. Like the best sellers invest in themselves. And if you invest in yourself, or if your company has a professional development stipend or whatever, like I can't think of a better way to invest in yourself than P Club. So check it out. Okay. So I don't see any real questions coming through in the chat for you, Chris. I'm surprised. I'm surprised.
I do see Ryan just purchased the multi-threading masterclass by Kristen, which is a big one.
Yes. Lovely.
Ryan.
Lovely. All right, cool. Well, if you're curious to learn more, I guess that'll be a wrap for us, Chris. You'll get 15 minutes back to go and do all the things you need to do in Charleston, South Carolina. Join our community as well. If you're interested in learning more about how to design these workflows, how to implement them for your company, it's community.copy.ai. You can check it out there. And with that, thank you all. This is how you drive sales performance in 2024. Foundational work that's extremely important. Chris Orlob, you're the absolute best. Thank you for the time.
Appreciate you, sir.
All right, we'll see you soon.